Welcome back to our Sunlover Sunflowers project. I'm Sharon Chen, and in this video we're going to add some accents and finishing touches to our sunflower painting. The sunflowers at this point are pretty well finished with our basic colors and shading and highlighting, but at this stage I just feel like the flowers and the background aren't as well coordinated as they could be. I'd like to add some of the colors of the background into the flowers and some of the flower colors into the background. So here I'm dry brushing some of the orange and yellow and a little bit of white here and there in the blue background. And you can see as we do this, it pulls the colors of the flowers into the background and it loses that pasted on look. So I'm just going to add this in little spots, not evenly, but just randomly around the background. Some areas you can make more orange and some more yellow. And you want to keep these fairly soft. You don't want to cover up all your blue, but you just want these little hints of color. So once you get it to your liking, we're going to move on and add some colors into the sunflower petals. I'm going to start with our sap green and just start dry brushing some of this green on the petals to add some accents into the shaded areas. You can also, do green. You can add a little bit of yellow to your green to lighten it. But I just want to, like I said, add these accents more in the shaded areas. So you can see here I'm going over the shading around the center, some of these back petals. And this is one way that, we can further tone down this flower that's not the main flower. So we can set it into the background a little bit more. Adding this green to it kind of brings the color of our flower bud down into the sunflowers. We don't actually have any leaves in this picture, but the bud has a lot of leaves that are green, so we're just repeating that color through the other flowers. By repeating colors throughout a painting, it just makes it more cohesive. Next, we'll start adding some of the background colors into the flowers. So I've put out some of our blues and it's cobalt blue and the cobalt teal. And I just want to brush these colors onto the edges of some of these petals to merge them into the background a little bit. Just lose some of these edges. Just softens down the division between the background and the petal, and it gives a little bit more depth to the painting. So I'm kind of trying to pay attention to what color is in the background behind each of these areas. So here I'm going to use a little bit of the cobalt teal because that background area is a little bit more cobalt teal, and in other areas that are more the cobalt blue, I'll pick up the cooler blue. But we're just going to work around and soften down some of these petal tips. You don't want to do all of them. It's just here and there to make some just, again, blend into the background a little bit more. And give a little more dimension to your painting. I'm going to add some greens to this front flower too. So we're going to use the sap green, but lighten it down a little bit with some of the lemony yellow. I think that's the Hansa yellow light. So we're going to do it like we did the number 2 flower and just dry brush some of this green into the shadow areas. You can do that on the outer petals and then some closer to the center. If you see any little of the little triangle crevices between the petals, you can fill them in with some of your background blues. So, I'm just going to bounce back and forth between the blues and greens and add some of these accents into this big number 1 sunflower. I hope you can see at this point how everything seems to be coming together. We're repeating the greens from the flower bud over in the sunflowers and repeating a little bit of that background color into the petals. In the next step, we're going to add some bright white highlights to the edges of some of these petals just to make them sparkle a little more. So I'm using the titanium white and I'm just kind of tapping this white on the edges of some of these petals I want to emphasize. You can make some real sharp and some you can just blend out just a little bit more so they're not too uniform. Again, I don't want to do every petal, I just want to do the ones that I really want to pop forward. Changes in value are what really give your painting dimension from, the darkest darks up to the lightest lights. And add a few more to this second sunflower, but keep them just a little softer because you want all the attention to be on that main sunflower, but you want the second one to have a little bit of interest. It's just not the star of our picture. We'll just keep adjusting as the colors dry and settle down. You may need to go back over some of these highlights to beef them up before you're finished. Next, we're going to add some highlights to our flower bud. And these little center strokes that go over the flower center, I'm repeating center twice, are actually flower petals. And in my original bouquet, this bud was for a sunflower that was a lot lighter. It was more of just a real pale butter yellow versus the real warm sunshiny yellow of the other 2 flowers. So I'm making these little center petals that haven't opened yet very light. So I'm just stroking some of the white over what was originally the green and yellow, just to kind of differentiate these from the leaves of the flower bud. The outer green are leaves, these little inner strokes over the dark center are flower petals of the unopened flower. If you don't feel like you have enough strokes to begin with, you can always, tuck some little extra ones in here. With this light color at the center just really calls attention to the inside of the bud and lets the outer leaves sort of fall more into the background. Add a little bit of the white into this back flower, our little wallflower back here. So these are going to be very soft white accents. And now I want to soften this transition between the center of the flowers and the petals. So I'm using a small 1/4 inch angle brush and I'm floating black around this edge. An interesting fact that I just learned by Googling sunflower centers is that sunflower centers are actually made up of a lot of tiny little flowers or florets. The outer petals are called the ray petals, and the inner center, all those little flowers are called disc flowers. So each of those little center flowers in a sunflower make the seeds that we eat in snacks, the sunflower seeds. So finish softening all the edges on your sunflower centers. And then we're going to use a fine liner brush and some paint thinned with water to like a milky or inky consistency. And I'm just going to pull little short squiggly strokes out into this floated area between the center and the petals, just to give a little fuzzy texture to that outer edge. We're just going to do this all the way around the sunflower centers. We'll add some stronger highlights to our centers by just softly dabbing on some white. I'm just barely scuffing the surface with the flat of the brush. I've got a little bit of white on it. I'm not going to do it evenly all the way around. I'm keeping these a little more to the right. If you get too much paint on your brush, just wipe it off a little bit. And if they get too bright, you can go back and tone them down with some of the burnt umber. So just kind of stroke back and forth over top of the paint. Obviously, you want the white to be a little dry when you put the burnt umber over it, otherwise it gets a little bit muddy. But you can go back and forth. If you get too much of the brown on it, you can add some white back in, but just want a nice balance with some stronger highlights to the right edge of the flower center and some softer highlights towards the left. I'm going to put in some flower stems, otherwise these sunflowers are just floating in space. So we've got 3 flowers and a bud, so we're going to add 4 stems. You can trace these in if you want. I'm just kind of freehanding with a flat brush using the sap green and some of the yellows. You want a little variation in color, so you have some shadows and highlights. You can add some stronger shadows with some of the burnt umber. There's our 4th stem. There's no details of these, you just want a little variation in lights and darks. Again, you want these sort of in the background, so but it gives a base to our flowers so they're just not floating in air. We're going to go back and work on our highlights on the petals some more. So I'm picking up some of the white and the Hansa yellow light and just, again, beefing up some of our highlights. This is just sort of a personal preference, so you can add as, depends on how strong you want your highlights. Do some on this flower bud also. As I keep repeating, you know, when the colors dry, they tone down a lot. So I always find that I have to reevaluate every once in a while and decide where I want stronger darks or lights. So this can take several layers by the time you finish the painting. So I'm focusing a little bit more on the bud this time, adding some stronger highlights to these tips of the leaves. It's always a hard decision to know when to stop. I want to beef up the shadows, especially here in the front where it goes behind the sunflower. So I'm using more of the green. And this flower, I'm just toning down the white highlights a little more so they aren't as, I guess, bright as the center or the main sunflower. We've got highlights, but they're more yellow than the white. Also, if your petals get if you get too much white on them and they're too chalky, you can always come back over with this Hansa yellow and go over them, and it will add that sunflower yellow color back in. I just like the effect of this cool yellow against the warm yellows. Makes the petals very vibrant. We're heading into the final steps on our sunflower painting, and we're going to work on this back flower bud, similar to what we did on the sunflower petals, by brushing some of the background color over these back leaves. Want to set some of these further into the background so they're not as prominent. So I'm using the two blues, the cobalt blue and the cobalt teal blue, and I'm just dry brushing here over some of these back leaves to add that color in. These are our accent colors. And as you do that, you can kind of see that the back petals of the back leaves of the flower just merge with the background a little bit more. It makes the front of and center of the bud seem a little more prominent. And we'll take one more pass at these shadows with some of the sap green. I see a little bit of the orange background showing through just a little too much. So I'm just going to go back in and these little crevices where I see that orange peeking through and just tone that down some more. Just add some final adjustments to our shadows here on the bud and a little bit on this back sunflower, and I think we're about finished. So I hope you enjoyed this project, and follow me on YouTube or join my painting club at SharonChin.com for more tutorials.